everyone, or afternoon or evening. And thank you, first of all, to Dr. Willer for inviting me to be part of this great panel and for organising what looks like a wonderful and important conference. I think by now we'll become very used to using Zoom, which has many great benefits for bringing people together internationally in ways that would not be possible before the pandemic. So today I'll be talking about a slightly different but very much related context to my preceding panelists, which is the theme of peace building and non-violence, and how this theme is articulated in the United Arab Emirates in a manner that lends itself to the UAE project of political authoritarianism. This paper is drawn from a book I published earlier last year, and it's also part of a project I'm currently working on about how authoritarian regimes use the language of peace, non-violence, religious freedom, religious toleration as part of their public diplomacy. I won't talk for too long to leave plenty of time for questions and discussion, which is always the richest part of any discussion. So when thinking about themes of peace building, non-violence, Emirati, political authoritarianism from an Islamic perspective, one of the things in particular of an institution founded in early 2014 called the Forum for Promoting Peace in Muslim Societies. The forum is based in Abu Dhabi and is led by the Mauritanian Sheikh Abdullah bin Bayyah, and it also features prominent ulama such as the Sheikh Azhar Ahmed Al the American Hamza Yusuf, and other prominent figures. Now, as the name suggests, the Peace Forum is ostensibly dedicated to building peace, not only in the Arab world, but further afield also. Now, among the attendees here, I'm sure that it is clear that there is a certain tension, if you can put it that way, between the existence of a particular institution or forum dedicated to promoting peace, based in a country like the UAE that is notorious for its human rights abuses and hyper-authoritarianism, not only domestically but also throughout the region. And that's something I'll be talking about and exploring briefly just now. We can talk about it a bit more in the Q&A as well. So, just by way of brief introduction, the Forum for Promoting Peace in Muslim Societies was created in Abu Dhabi in early 2014. It's a forum sponsored by the UAE government and is first and foremost a collection of Islamic scholars and interfaith leaders, primarily Christian and Jewish leaders from North America and Europe, as well as particularly famous for its large interfaith peace conference held in Abu Dhabi every December. Now, when the forum was founded, it was described as an effort to respond to what participants characterized as the violence and chaos in the Arab world. At the time, late 2013, early 2014, we will of course remember this was the aftermath of the military coup in Egypt, when the military overthrew the government of President Morsi with the support of the UAE. The civil war in Syria was entering some of its bloodiest phases, a war the UAE was also indirectly involved in, while the UAE was also beginning to escalate its intervention in Yemen also at this time. So at the time, this was during a period that we might call the counter-revolution to the Arab Spring, a counter-revolution that the UAE was very much at the forefront of in a very activist and military way. To the extent that the former US Secretary of Defense, Jim Mattis, would refer to the country as Little Sparta in a complimentary way. So that's the context of violence and upheaval that the Forum was ostensibly founded as and meant to be a response to. Now, importantly, and we can discuss this and elaborate more on this in the Q&A if you would like, the founders of the Forum, leading prominent and famous members of the Muslim scholarly elites, the ulama, describe the causes of violence and upheaval in the region not as part of a contest between political authoritarianism on the one hand and efforts to promote different forms of democracy on the other, but rather in purely Islamic terms. That is to say, when in March 2014, the founders of the Forum gave a rationale for Islamic scholars to become involved in peace building in the region, they argued that the region was beset by a distinct form of religious chaos, as they characterized it, or more specifically, a chaos of fatwas, a folder for the fatwa, folder for the fatwa. For example, the opening speech at the time by the American scholar Hamza Yusuf, the UAE foreign minister who was sponsoring the Forum, Abdullah al-Nahyan, and the Mauritanian scholar Abdullah al-Beya, blamed regional violence solely on, to quote the UAE foreign minister, fatwas issued by poorly educated men. While Sheikh al-Beya said at the time, phrase that it is said behind every act of terrorism, there is a fatwa. So in the view of those figures, these leading scholars and the UAE foreign ministers, it was misguided fatwas and Islamic opinions that were the cause of regional violence. And this is an argument or a perception that is repeated by the Forum to this day. Now, there are a number of things we can say about the perception of this argument. One thing I would briefly highlight here is that this characterization of the causes of violence in the Arab world as Islamic is not simply an act of submission to prevailing hegemonic assumptions about Islam as a violent religion. Rather, it's an act of claiming on behalf of this particular group of ulama who inhabit the Forum, who wish to gain access to the very substantial institutional, financial, and other forms of political support from nation states such as the UAE for their own distinct projects. The point being, so the argument goes by the participants in the Forum in Abu Dhabi, is that if the causes of violence in the region are poorly educated men issuing fatwas that lead the masses astray, as the Forum characterized it, the solution then is for the state, like the support instead properly qualified scholars who will then issue correct fatwas to students that will then be a solution to this problem of violence in the region. In the eyes of Roland and Hans Yusuf or Abdullah Beya, they themselves are these properly qualified scholars who, if they are given enough resources and support by the state, like the UAE, will be the support, the solution to the problem of religious violence throughout the region as they understand it. And the way this is characterized in a particular way by the head of the Forum, Abdullah Beya, who uses the image of a firefighter putting out a fire in a building. In the view of Sheikh Beya, religious scholars who are part of the Forum are like firefighters whose job is to put out a fire, the flames of war in the region, as he characterized it, without inquiring as to why a fire started. Of course, perhaps to us, others, we can observe that it appears to be an unusual argument, or an unusual view perhaps, but does also even fit very well with an Arab Spring context or a post-Arab Spring context. There was a struggle between those that wanted some form of democratic, more accountable governance on the one hand, and those that wanted to maintain authoritarian regimes in some form or other. Nevertheless,
that was the argument being advanced by scholars who had very much been a part of state institutions in the region and had an interest in those state institutions, those Islamic scholarly institutions, being maintained and strengthened. Right? That being said, whether or not a figure like Sheikh bin Bayyah genuinely viewed violence in places like Egypt or Syria in 2014 as stemming exclusively from Islamic roots is clearly something open to debate. Nevertheless, that was and is the view advanced by the Islamic scholars who participated in the forum and who continue to be a major part of it, which is a view that is very well received, both by the Emirati government and internationally. Since the forum's founding in 2014, the forum's annual interfaith conferences has become one of the marquee events of the international interfaith calendar. Every December, large numbers of very high-profile religious leaders from around the world and foreign diplomats come to Abu Dhabi, where people will give speeches about the importance of religious tolerance and interfaith dialogue as the solution to violence plaguing the region. There'll be panels and workshops and so on, and then people will disperse again. Now, one way of thinking about why the UAE would be interested in investing in and promoting a forum of this kind with these sort of glamorous and high-profile international conferences is to do with something that can be called state branding. Right? Now, state branding is a theory that small states need to brand themselves on the world stage, a bit like corporations in a way. The purpose of this state branding is that these small states around the world, Panama, Singapore, places like the UAE or Qatar, are competing among each other for investment, as it were. In the case of small states, this particular kind of investment that they're competing among each other for is the interest of outside powers in preserving their security, or, to be more specific, in preserving the security of the ruling families or ruling regimes. So when it comes to the tiny Gulf states, it's worth remembering that although these states are fabulously wealthy, historically their royal families have been very vulnerable, as they are today. And they're all quite similar in terms of demographics, economies, and so on. Small states in the Gulf like Kuwait, Qatar, or the UAE have all had historically territory claimed or occupied by their larger neighbors, such as Saudi Arabia, Iraq, or Iran, and so on. Thus, despite their wealth, royal families in these states have always needed a powerful outsider to protect them, either from external threats or from internal calls for democracy or more accountable governance. Since the days of the Carter Doctrine, the outside power that has always preserved the security of the Gulf royal families has been the United States. Having said that, in recent years, smaller powers such as Russia, China, Israel, and Turkey have also become increasingly important in the region, as there is a growing sense that the United States will begin to withdraw from the region in the coming years. In that context, we can think of the Forum for Promoting Peace in Muslim Societies as one part of a very successful effort by the UAE as part of a wider state branding effort to maintain the interest of outside powers, such as the United States, in preserving the security of the royal family. This, by the UAE, this investment in a form of Islamic state branding is part of a wider package of branding in which the UAE positions itself as a key ally, for example, in other areas too, the fight against climate change, an integral part of the global economy, a regional center of COVID vaccine production, and things like that. So in that vein, the Forum for Promoting Peace in Muslim Societies is routinely praised by American and European diplomats who work in the growing field of international interfaith dialogue and the interfaith leaders who travel to Abu Dhabi to participate every year And in my view, that's the main reason that the forum was primarily created. So the UAE's hosting of the Forum for Promoting Peace in Muslim Societies then is the apex of a wider effort on behalf of the UAE to brand itself as a haven of peace, interreligious toleration, interfaith dialogue, in a region that is caricatured as uniquely intolerant of religious difference. In sponsoring the forum, then, and investing in it, the UAE presents itself as a major partner, or the major partner today, in the promotion of a sort of moderate Islam or religious tolerance, which has been a foreign policy goal of the United States since 9/11 and before. And initiatives like the Peace Forum work very effectively at asserting the value of the UAE regime in its current form to the United States as an ally, while also diverting attention away from human rights abuses of citizens and residents in the country and also overseas. This branding is very effective if we think about the very high-profile initiatives that the Peace Forum has been involved in that have boosted the brand of the UAE internationally enormously. Back in 2014, former US President Barack Obama famously referenced Sheikh bin Bayer and the Peace Forum in a speech at the UN. More recently, we can think back to the papal visit of Pope Francis to Abu Dhabi in February 2019, during the UAE's official year of tolerance. This was the first papal visit ever to the Arabian Peninsula. While Pope Francis was there, he signed a declaration of Christian-Muslim understanding in Abu Dhabi, in which Sheikh Ahmed Al-Tayyib and Sheikh Abdullah bin Bayer played important roles. We can also think about the way the forum played a role in helping to brand the normalization agreement between the UAE and Israel in 2020, rather than an agreement between two nation states, instead helping to rebrand it as a coming together of Muslim-Jewish brotherhood, hence the name the Abraham Accords, right? A way of rebranding this particular agreement. So it's usually the case that when one reads about the UAE in the international media, it will usually be a reference to a high-profile initiative, such as the Peace Forum, or the renovation or opening of a church or a synagogue in Abu Dhabi or Dubai, which shows rather than discussions of human rights in the country, which shows how effective this branding effort is. So let's start to wrap up. The existence of the Peace Forum in a hyper-authoritarian country and its relationship to high-profile interfaith activities also helps us zoom out a little bit and think about what it is about religion and religious traditions that concerns authoritarian regimes in repressing them or promoting them in the first place. So here, I would just draw on the work of political scientists such as Annie Sarkisian to note that it's quite rare these days for an authoritarian regime to be concerned with the intricacies of a particular religious tradition or religious doctrine, for example. Rather, what concerns authoritarian regimes are the fact that religious organizations are oftentimes the most cohesive in a society, oftentimes the most activist in a society, and it is the public political elements of religious traditions that regimes find threatening, rather than elements of private belief and private practice that traditions also have too. Consequently, for authoritarian regimes in general, and we can think about the UAE in this way too, when it comes to promoting particular elements of religious traditions, this is always a partial promotion or acceptance, okay, that foregrounds private beliefs and private worship, rather than more public or political elements that religious traditions have as well. Now, the arguments of the forum and participants fit into that mold as well, as the kind of moderate Islam or Islam of peace they advocate is a form of the tradition that is fully under the control of the modern nation state, rather than being outside. So just to wrap up, there are many things we can talk about and think about when it comes to contextualizing the UAE's many high-profile initiatives in relation to Islam and peace building, which generally has quite little by way of substance to it. We can contextualize this as part of a longer history, dating back to the aftermath of 9/11, or before even, when states like Morocco or Jordan would also, in the aftermath of 9/11, present themselves as models of a moderate Islam that played very much into outsized expectations about why there was violence in the region and what those solutions would be, which is a very reductive and partial view. Thank you very much, and I look forward to your questions.